This is a pig's head, not a prop, not a joke. Dinner, boiled until the meat slid off the skull, packed into a loaf with vinegar, chilled overnight, then sliced cold and eaten on crackers. They called it souse meat, and for 100 years, nobody thought it was strange at all. Your great-grandparents in the Appalachian mountains ate things that would empty a modern restaurant, a plant poisonous enough to kill them, beans hung up to dry on sewing thread like laundry, an animal most people now pay somebody to remove from under their porch. But not one of these foods was an accident. Something enormous was taken from these mountains, and everything people ate afterward was the answer to that loss. 25 forgotten Appalachian foods, and it starts with a tree. Before any of this, the Appalachian mountains had the American chestnut. It is difficult to overstate what that tree was. 1 in every 4 trees in the eastern hardwood forest was a chestnut. They grew straight and enormous, and every autumn they dropped nuts by the ton. So many that families swept them up in baskets and children were sent out with sacks. Those nuts fed people through winter, roasted and boiled and ground into meal. They fed the hogs that became the ham and the fatback and the lard. They fed the deer and the turkey that came down to feed on them. And when the trees were felled, the wood built the cabins, the fence rails, the furniture. People were rocked in chestnut cradles and buried in chestnut caskets. An entire way of eating rested on one species. Nobody thought about that because why would you? It had always been there. In 1904, a forester at the Bronx Zoological Park in New York noticed the chestnuts there were dying. Orange cankers, split bark, dead crowns. The cause was a fungus that had arrived from Asia on imported nursery stock, and nothing in this forest had ever met it before. It did not happen quickly, and that is the cruel part. The blight moved south roughly 200 miles every 10 years, slow enough to watch. Families saw it come over the ridge. They saw the crowns go bare one season, then the next ridge, then their own. By 1940, an estimated 3.5 billion American chestnut trees were dead. Not thinned, gone. The single largest food source in the mountains was removed inside one human lifetime, and the people who lived there had to replace it with whatever was left. What was left is the rest of this list. So the hog became everything. And when a hog was killed, usually the first hard cold of November, because there was no refrigeration and the weather did the work, not one edible part of it was allowed to go in the ground. The head and the feet went into the pot for souse meat, boiled down until the gelatin set it firm. The intestines were cleaned and cleaned and cleaned again and became chitlins. The skin and fat, once the lard was rendered out, left crisp brown scraps called cracklings that went straight into cornbread. The trotters were pickled in vinegar and eaten cold out of the jar, and the fatback in plain salt-cured pork fat and flavored nearly every pot of beans in the mountains for the next 50 years. It sounds like poverty food, and it was. It is also a completely rational answer to the question, how do you make one animal last a whole winter? With the chestnuts gone, the wood still had to produce, so squirrel went in the pot, stewed slow at dumplings, and it was ordinary enough that recipes for it sat in mainstream American cookbooks for generations. Rabbit, deer, groundhog, raccoon, muskrat, and possum all followed, depending on the season and the year and how thin things had got. And then there is the one that still stops people. Poke salad is made from pokeweed, a plant that is genuinely poisonous. The root can kill you. The leaves grow more toxic as the plant ages. So people took only the youngest spring shoots, boiled them, poured the water off, boiled them again in fresh water, poured that off, and boiled them a third time before frying what survived with bacon grease in it. 3 boilings. That is not a recipe. That is a set of instructions for eating something that would otherwise hurt you, worked out by trial and error and passed down until it was safe. Here is where it turns, because none of this was helpless. It was engineering. Green beans were threaded onto a needle and hung in long strings behind the wood stove until they shriveled. And because they looked like tiny, empty trousers hanging up, people called them leather britches. Dried that way, a summer garden fed a family in February. The technique very likely came from the Cherokee, who had been preserving food in these mountains a long time before anyone else arrived. Dried corn was soaked in an alkaline solution until the tough hulls slipped off, which turned it into hominy, softer, easier to grind, and though nobody had the word for it, far more nutritious than the corn they started with, Sorghum cane was pressed and boiled down into a dark, sweet molasses that replaced sugar entirely. Rams came up first in spring, tasting of garlic and onion at once, so pungent that the smell carries out through your skin for days. The Menominee name for the plant simply means the skunk. And lettuce, too bitter to eat raw, was killed with a ladle of hot bacon grease and eaten wilted. Every one of those is a solution. And then there was the part that was purely good. Pawpaws, the largest fruit native to North America, custard soft, tasting somewhere between banana and mango, growing wild in the hollows and almost unknown outside them. Persimmons, inedible and mouth-puckering until the first frost, then suddenly sweet. Wild grapes and elderberries picked by the bucket. Soup beans simmered all day with a piece of fatback poured over cornbread and eaten with raw onion, which was not the poor cousin of a meal, it was the meal. And there are people who would still choose it over anything you could order tonight. An apple stack cake made from dried apples and sorghum, layer on thin layer. The old story says, wedding guests each brought a layer, and the bride's cake was however tall the community made it. The chestnut never came back. 3.5 billion trees, and the forest that replaced them is a different forest. But every dish in this video is a thing somebody worked out so their family could eat. That is not poverty food. That is 200 years of people refusing to go hungry and writing it down in the only place they could, in what they cooked.